Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Suisbuki. Coming up,
we should seriously address the underlying conditions. By that I mean overcrowded housing, low income.
COVID response failed vulnerable people. Also,
we can't raise enough money to actually keep up with how much need there is.
1 in 4 households are going without food, and a scientist is up for an award after years of helping Pacific nations. Research on the impacts of COVID-19 clearly shows high death rates among Pacific people in Aotearoa and the need to provide better supports in the future. The research lead, Professor Sir Colin Tukuitonga, co-director of Te Pautoko Ora a Kiwa, the Centre for Pacific and Global Health at the University of Auckland, said the response failed to target Pasifika needs adequately. He told Don Wiseman that having this formal study shows the disproportionate effect of the pandemic.
We knew at the time, and we've had prior experiences where the disparities exist, where Māori and Pacific people tend to be disproportionately affected. We knew then. I guess the benefit of this is that we've systematically looked at data and evidence and interviewed people and been able to document the fact that Pacific communities were disproportionately affected, more deaths, more hospital admissions, more cases on a population basis, and the fact that we didn't provide a good enough response to meet their needs. I mean, I'm on the record as saying, no question that a New Zealand national response was up there with the best in the world overall. But I think we relied too much on conventional delivery and one size should fit everyone and missed out on being able to better meet the needs of Māori communities and Pacific people, for example. So, yeah, it's not new in the sense that we were aware, but what this does is a formal, systematic, reviewed study that confirmed those findings.
Another such event is inevitable. What needs to change?
Oh, that's an excellent point. So one would hope that we've learned from this. A key thing would be to engage Pacific leaders, and Māori, I'd say the same. Pacific providers, inform them and engage them and involve them earlier on in the piece. I think the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccination was a good example where we relied on how we've always delivered the vaccines, and clearly it didn't work because the uptake by Pacific people was very slow and very sluggish. Then the Pacific communities, the churches, Pacific providers put on and ran their own vaccination drives using drive-ins through churches, longer hours, more options. And in the end, in fact, the Pacific community uptake of COVID-19 dose 1 and 2 was the best in the country. So we've learned some things. One, you can't expect to have the same delivery for everyone. And in the case of Māori and Pacific communities, you need to engage the leaders, the providers, better target the responses we have. I also think that we should seriously address the underlying conditions. By that I mean overcrowded housing, low income, poor access to services, which are chronic, and we know about those now because that had a big bearing on why the disproportionate number of cases in these communities. In other words, there's plenty of evidence, plenty of information that we should learn from in order to prepare for the next pandemic. I suppose my fear is that even though we're aware of these things, we tend somehow unable or unwilling to implement those. I mean, we knew in 1918, for example, that the death rate in Māori people was 6 times those of Pākehā people. In other words, we knew the disproportionate impact that these outbreaks tend to have on, Māori communities, Pacific communities, but for some reason we seem unable or unwilling to use our knowledge to try to make things better for everyone.
How do you think a change is going to be embraced, given the general tone over matters such as these in the New Zealand political community?
Well, one would hope that we have a political leadership. I thought our national response in the COVID-19 outbreak was successful because of the political leadership provided by Jacinda Ardern and the government at the time, supported by some of our scientists that produced the data and the evidence. I fear that if we have the current lot in charge, if and when an outbreak happens, that we could in fact be worse off. So the political environment is really important in terms of whether or not we're able to address these outbreaks effectively or not. And I know that equity is a dirty word with the current government, so somehow we've got to be creative and try to do the best we can. I guess I just stressed the point of how important it is that we have a helpful, supportive political environment.
More children are going hungry than has been seen in a decade, according to a new report. The Salvation Army's annual State of the Nation report published finds that 1 in 4 households are going without food sometimes or often. Grace Fever-Eye reports.
The Salvation Army says that concerned people's basic needs aren't being met, as a new report reveals 400,000 people were on benefits in December. The report shows the highest number of beneficiaries since the 1990s. It shows Māori and Pacific people are being disproportionately affected by rising unemployment, food insecurity, violent crime, and a growing prison population. Lieutenant Ian Hudson says the number of children going without food has increased significantly.
1 in 4 children reported going without food sometimes or often, and if you flick to Pasifika people, it's 1 in 2, every second child going without food sometimes or often.
Ian Hudson says something must be done to improve the statistics. For Pasifika families, it is even worse, with 1 in 2 children going without, sometimes or always without food. Dave Letele runs the Butterbean Motivation Food Bank in South Auckland. He says the report's findings are no surprise.
And it's an absolute disgrace, and it's almost as if they just don't care. The powers that be just don't care. And I always think it doesn't matter what you think of the parents, it's not the children's fault. It's just, how can we have hungry children in New Zealand?
Dave Letele says he's seen other food banks close or drastically close their services.
We're still operating, but on just a fraction of what we used to do, but we're very limited on what we can do. Otherwise, we'll go broke. That's just the fact of the matter.
Julie Chapman is the CEO and founder of Kids Can, that helps children affected by poverty with food and clothing. She says a recent survey of its 200 partner schools across New Zealand mirrors what the Salvation report is saying.
It paints an absolutely heartbreaking and bleak picture of what children in hardship and their families are living with, for sure.
Julie Chapman says the needs out in the community is overwhelming.
We can't raise enough money to actually keep up with how much need there is. We've got, we're taking 40 new schools into our program this year, but we've still got another 20 that have applied for support since last winter. So it just keeps going, and it feels like we keep having the same conversation every year.
The Salvation Army's charity social policy director, Bonnie Robinson, said it was vital that the government prioritise New Zealanders' basic needs.
A scientist with New Zealand's Institutes of Water and Atmospheric Research, or NIWA, who has worked on early warning systems for Pacific Island nations, is nearing the end of a very long career. Ellen Porteous has spent decades helping create climate early warning systems and forecasting tools for Samoa, Solomon Islands, the Cook Islands, Fiji, Vanuatu and Tonga. This includes user-friendly tools that provide early warnings for extreme weather, enabling communities to prepare and evacuate, potentially saving lives. Mr. Porteous told Don Wiseman about his work, which has earned him a nomination for a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Well, it goes back to probably the early 2000s, where globally people started talking about climate early warning systems as part of the Millennium Goals and sustainability goals and all that, to build resilience. And can we predict enough about the climate to understand what the impacts will be of changes in the weather and the climate on different timescales? So that's the challenge. I suppose from the late 90s or late 80s and early 90s, the growing power of computing, the accessibility to computing, analytical systems and things like that gave us the opportunity to really develop better weather forecasts and better seasonal outlooks. And as you know, it's one thing to predict the weather and the climate, but it's another thing to predict the impacts. That's the challenge. Can we understand enough about what the impacts might be to be able to predict them?
So in terms of the work that you have done, can we be a bit more specific about countries in Polynesia, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu?
Yeah, so Solomon Islands is a good one because we know that there is an influence, a seasonal influence from the rainfall on the subsequent cases of malaria. So obviously malaria is propagated by mosquitoes. So if the mosquitoes are breeding strongly, then the number of cases is likely to be much higher. And around Honiara, for example, there are sort of marshy areas, and if the marshes get flushed out, by heavy rain in the wet season, then mosquitoes don't breed so well. And if there's a dry season, if the wet season is drier than normal, so to speak, then there's a lot of stagnant water around, so the mosquitoes breed well, and then the malaria cases are a lot higher. So you have to be able to think about what's the season going to be like, and therefore what will be the likely outcomes for malaria incidents. And there's a lot of degrees of freedom in there, as you can appreciate. But having the system in place and the conversation going is very helpful. I guess another example is hydrometric power storage. For example, we're working with the Samoan Electricity Power Corporation. They have quite a large dam called the Awhalilo Dam, which holds quite a bit of water, but not enough to generate power continuously throughout the season, throughout the year, if you like. And so you don't want to run out of water and then you have to buy extra diesel, so you use it sparingly. But also you want to use all the water that you have because you don't want the water to run over the spillway, and that gets wasted. So to try and understand how the climate is progressing, to forecast a few days ahead or maybe out to a month ahead, so they make efficient use of the water that they have, don't run out or don't waste it, that kind of a thing. That's the kind of a challenge of early warning on that time scale as well. But then other things are encompassed in terms of, for example, agriculture. Is the season going to be drier or wetter than normal? And does one have to, do people need to plan ahead for additional irrigation supplies, or is it going to be a reasonable season for crop growth? So there's a huge amount of customizable information that's where the real hard work is.
When you go down to community level, do you think you're better able to get information through to communities of an impending horrendous bit of weather than you were, say, 20 years ago?
Oh, I think much better now because we have a lot of electronic delivery systems, web pages and the like, but also there's a lot more awareness now of the information that's available. And so while it's true that you can rely on electronic media and SMS and all of that, at the end of the day, it really depends on community leaders and community sort of spokespeople conveying the messages to their communities. And that's the real power of the system that needs to be operational. And so that requires on trust and relationships and also respect for people's local knowledge anyway. People know a lot about the situations and the communities they live in. They know when the risks of tropical cyclones are becoming apparent, or coastal flooding, or storm warnings and all of that. So you have to try and build on all of that. But it does rely on local communicators, national communicators, government departments putting in place systems to communicate warnings and talk about thresholds that might be breached, etc. So yes, the answer is yes, we are in a much better position now to propagate that kind of information.
Well, you have had a 56-year-long career, I understand, doing this sort of work. I presume you're getting near the end of that. And you've been nominated for a Science New Zealand Lifetime Achievement Award. Do you know how you're going to go on that?
It was very unexpected, but I guess I've been doing this for a long time. I've had a career in India earlier on, and that was very rich and rewarding, and then joined the Met Service and had quite a bit of experience there, and then more latterly with NIWA. So I've had a variety of experience and opportunities in my career. But I grew up on a farm, so I'm a farmer by nature, probably put it that way. And so I've tended to focus on agriculture and building resilience in the sort of agricultural space. But yeah, I've no idea how the nomination will pan out, but I'm certainly grateful for the experience I've had over my however many years it is. I'm still involved in a couple of big international projects, one with the United Nations Environment Programme and another with colleagues in Australia called Climate and Ocean Support Programme in the Pacific, which is across 14 countries. So those programs are going for another 2 years. So I'm hoping to gradually fade out during that time. I've got very talented colleagues and younger staff who are enthusiastic and very well capable of doing the work. So I'm enjoying a slower pace, but I think I'll keep going for a few months yet.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā soifua.